People need to know about this because it's a big thing. We're in schools and so many children now are still in a reflexive, involuntary state. We will then see delays in speech, in fine motor control, in gross motor control, emotional regulation.
The body tells us a lot about what's going on in the brain. The brain and body isn't disconnected.
We're trying to teach our children because they're chronologically 5. They're not ready to be taught yet because movement is first.
If your social engagement is good, communication is good, that's much more valuable in an academic setting. Reading and writing becomes easier if the child can regulate emotion. So I'm all for symptoms, brilliant, but don't limit the child to assume that's the way you're going to be for the rest of your life. That's what I don't agree with, because that is inconsistent with the modern science in neuroplasticity. Most parents will probably listen to this and think, well, this blueprint, I've missed it. Well, look, it don't matter. It's finding out what they've missed, and then we put that information back in by assessing the reflexes, and then we can integrate them.
In a more sedentary world overflowing with screens, stress and processed foods, our brains are under constant pressure, especially those of our children. Brains Under Attack is a podcast that exposes modern environments and teaches us how to build healthy brains in an unhealthy world. Hello and welcome to another BrainX pod. We're the team behind BrainX Movement, and we are a company that's dedicated to understanding brain development, but specifically how to prevent and how to intervene in neurological conditions in children. Now I've got the experts here, Seb Kane, Steve Peters. We're all working with children. We're all learning and understanding exactly how the environment impacts on brain development. And we've talked a lot about in the last shows about what makes a healthy brain, what are the phases and the stages a brain needs to go through. Now we're going to talk about specifically some of these causes and some of these factors that might send brain development off track and potentially turn into a developmental disorder. We talk a lot about primitive reflexes. There are specific primitive reflexes that we're born with that help us survive, and these primitive reflexes need to disappear, and they're not disappearing in our children. Guys, let's talk about primitive reflexes in a little bit more detail. There's 10 that are really important.
So I think this is one of the biggest conversations that us as parents, head teachers, school teachers, people that are looking after nurseries, that it's a subject that we must talk about and we need to understand more as a society. So there's not many people that you go around and chat to that even have ever heard of primitive reflexes. They are a set of involuntary movements that our babies and children have, and even within the womb, that help with survival. So they are movement patterns. They support positioning the baby in the womb during pregnancy. They help with the labor, and then they help with the first stages of life. So here, whenever I talk to anybody about this, us as parents and teachers and things like that, they know a few of these reflexes without knowing their reflexes. So we all know that if a baby puts their hand out and you put anything in that hand, it will close shut. That is the palmar reflex, and a baby will hold tight. That baby does not know how to let go yet. So it's an involuntary reflex, basically, that holds shut. So most parents know that, and especially if you are a parent with hair or anything like that, a baby will grab hold of that hair, and you then have to prise their fingers away in order for that child to let go, because they learn to let go. So there's lots of these reflexes, 90 or so. So they're the brain survival mechanism. They help with early stages of life. Babies have to do certain specific movements and hit milestones for the brain to then realize, I'm not needed anymore from an involuntary point of view, and I will switch these reflexes off. The only way they'll switch off is through movement. Now, we are finding more so than ever before, and Seb sees this in his clinic, and we're seeing it in schools, that these reflexes are not switching off. And we believe it's simply because our children are moving less than ever before. Sedentary lifestyle, in front of screens more than ever, car seats, prams, all these kind of things, swaddling more than we've ever done before. Amazing, but they have to switch off. And they have to switch off through movement. and our children are simply not moving as much. On the back of that, then, we will then see delays in speech, in fine motor control, in gross motor control, emotional regulation might be disturbed, eye contact's poor, social skills are not growing, and it's because the brain isn't developing quite as much as it used to.
These prims, how much of a contributing factor are they to this huge rise in developmental disorders that we're seeing in children? Explain the correlation between these primitive reflexes and these developmental disorders and sort of the phases they go through, whilst maybe picking each of them individually, and maybe we'll start talking about each individual reflex and specifically what they affect moving forward as well.
I think, Steve, it's significant because they're the foundational to the autonomic responses, to breathing, to heart rate, to digestive processes. So that's where these processes reside. So the primitive reflexes reside in exactly what controls the autonomic functions, like heart rate, like digestion, like breathing. And they're things we don't have to think about because it's the very early stages of development. But they're significant. And that's like saying, how significant is it if we started off with the roof of the house instead of the foundations of the house? And I think solid foundations are crucial. And that's what primitive reflexes set the foundations for us to develop good levels of behaviors, speech, emotional regulation, digestive processes, immune system functions. So they have a huge effect later on, because if the foundations of a house are unstable, then just think, if you keep building on top of the house eventually then collapses. And that's what we tend to see. So it creates the foundations to develop in that brain. So yeah, they're absolutely significant.
And each of them in isolation are as important as every other reflex, or the reflexes as a whole? How would you describe it? Because one of them, the palmar reflex, it seems like, okay, if that's still a little bit active, how can that affect all of these other cognitive issues and executive function? Is it about one, or is it about the combined effect of all the reflexes?
Yeah, so it's you remember, I've always believed that there's a blueprint to development. So what we look at is we look at how the child engages with its surroundings, with its parents. Let's say that's the first initiation of attachment. And it starts to develop these social cues and nonverbal cues. And that's when this brain is starting to develop. But that is when we start to play the little pinky and the big pinky, and we play the little finger, the big finger, whatever. And we work around the hands, around the gardens, and that's stimulating the palmar response. And that's one way of engaging it. And not only that, Steve, it happens in a blueprint formation, because the child has to learn to roll before it can sit. Because if it doesn't do that, then it's missed a crucial phase of development. And that's when you hear about the child later on, or the adult who then suffers with travel sickness or car sickness. The child who struggles to sit independently because it didn't develop the muscle tone in the core tends to then suffer with more digestion issues. The child who doesn't then progress from rolling to sitting independently to then being on all fours and to crawl then has immature coordination skills, or tends to lack the maturity of reading at their chronological age when they later get on into school. So each phase is preparing the child for the next level of skills. And that's why it's so important to get these reflexes integrated.
Okay. And if we were to talk about some of these reflexes individually and what their jobs are, Steve mentioned the palm one. It's always the easiest one to
go
grasp.
to, because people understand it. But I think another one's a really important one's a routine reflex. So when and I talk to lots of parents and schools about this, that if you tickle a young baby's face, that baby will turn towards that tickle. So that's the only way that the baby initially learns how to turn its head. It will link then to the sucking reflex. So the baby will turn its head, try and locate the nipple, and then and that's how breastfeeding happens, and that's how a baby then latches on to feed. So without that tickle and that involuntary rooting reflex in order to turn, our babies won't be able to latch on to feed. When a child then is stimulated and we tickle and we kiss our baby's cheeks and they blow raspberries and blow bubbles and all this kind of thing, it's the brain then start to recognize, well, actually this baby then starting to develop their own gross motor skills to start with, and then fine motor skills and muscle development happen. Well, once that's done enough, then that rooting reflex, that tickle and turn, imagine at our age, if you're still tickling your face and we're turning every time someone touches your face, well, that'll be...
Is it that exaggerated when you find, say, a 6-year-old child that's still got the rooting reflex still active? Are they turning towards the tickle still?
So if you tickle them, quite often you'll see an eye twitch or a lip will go, and when it's super, super active, they'll still turn. They'll turn towards that tickle. That means that rooting reflex is still there. Right. We then, on the side effects or the behaviours or the challenges you'll see because of that, will be speech delay and communication issues, and then children are still dribbling, for example, or food still right in their mouth when they're eating. So what's causing that?
Yeah.
There's immaturity somewhere, and it might be that rooting reflex still active. So we then go in and start tickling and stimulating the cheeks and getting our children to blow raspberries and blow their cheeks out to knock that reflex out. Because if a child of 6 has still got that reflex still active, there's immaturity in the brain, which will then produce some side effects or consequences or behaviors that would look immature for the chronological age of that child. So that's really, really important. And we're seeing this in schools. I was in a school this week, and there's a child with a 5-year-old child in reception that's really quite behind with his speech, while the rooting reflex is still active. So unless we can integrate that rooting reflex and switch it off, it could always be delayed. If you've got a child with a speech delay or articulation troubles or dribbling, there's a reason for it. It's not genetic. It's not fixed. It's not, right, there's nothing we can do about it. There's a reason. Let's check the rooting reflex first. And all these reflexes are the same. So that's a great one to chat about.
No, definitely.
And also, Steve, on that as well, you tend to see the children who have it as well, they suck the thumb, or they'll start to nibble on the top and it's quite wet, or the sleeve. And that's always a good indication to know that the rooting reflex could possibly still need integrating. And not only that, it then could develop into shallow breathers, which then develops into anxiety and even digestive. To sort of think of how the hand feeds the mouth. So if there's uncoordinated motor development, then it starts to develop with all these other asymmetries and dysfunctions as well, and immaturities.
We talk about the rooting reflex, and you mentioned that movement helps to integrate these reflexes. Specifically, why might a child's rooting reflex remain active?
There's a whole load of variables. How, the child's environment, how stressful was it? Was the neglect? Was there abuse? Poor nutrition, let's say, Steve, can affect certain neurotransmitters in the brain, development and growth and healing, because it prevents access to the parasympathetic nervous system, which should come on at around 16 months. Because in the first stages, the first years of life, everything is immature, it's developing, but they're in almost sympathetic states because of the nuclei in the brain, these important nuclei in the brain. So there's a whole load. It's lack of movement. We're now in a tech-driven world where modern environments are keeping us entertained in a static form. So we're not exploring the floor like we used to. Overprotective parenting, we're not climbing on top of sofas and we're not jumping off certain things. And there's a whole nutrition plays a critical role. There isn't just one domain that is the culprit. It's usually a combination effect. They're quite comorbid. And that's what our method tries to do. It works on understanding which variables, which domains we need to look at. And we test the child, and it will either remain, it will demonstrate it's integrated or unintegrated. And if it's unintegrated, our goal would be to get the foundations in order first. And I think that's what makes us quite unique as well in our methods.
These muscular systems.
Yeah.
But if a child then doesn't get enough stimulation from us as parents or grandparents or aunties or uncles or guardians or whatever, well, it won't just develop. We've got to support that to development. So, and we're seeing more so, and we're all guilty of this, that most parents now are engaging slightly less with our children because we're on our phones potentially a little bit more, because we're busy with work a little bit more, because life's a little bit too busy. Now, we're not blaming any parents for that, but and we've done it as well. So we must, our children must get the stimulation from us. They must get eye contact from us. They must get us. We used to have it with grandparents. This little piggy went to market and this little piggy stayed at home, and all those kind of games, and Incy Wincy spiders and all those kind of things. Those kind of interactions we have with our children are the type of things that will start to switch off these reflexes.
Okay.
And because we're now not doing them quite as much, these reflexes are hanging around more so now than ever before in humanity, I would have thought. This brain will not just develop. It needs stimulation, and it needs us, and it needs the outside world and an amazing environment to knock off these reflexes. These reflexes, Seb and I and yourself, Steve, we've spoken about these for years and years and years now. If you listen to any specialist or expert in this field, and there's lots of them in the States, and they are absolutely geniuses in this field, they all talk about primitive reflexes.
Yeah.
So all children that have any challenges or struggles or behaviors and things, we always must check for these reflexes first. They are the brain's foundation. And Seb spoke about it. They reside in the same part of the brain as breathing, heart rate, and those super important processes. That's how important these reflexes are. They sit with breathing. It's such a crucial thing that, and we talk to GPs about it, and our GPs and pediatricians, they've heard of primitive reflexes. They know they're a thing, but there isn't a lot of education around them, because historically they used to just disappear. And they used to just disappear because our children were moving more and playing more and outside more, and there was more stimulation for our children, because when we were children, our parents didn't have mobile phones they were looking at us all the time.
Yeah.
So it's such an important area of development that is now becoming a major problem.
And I think if you're looking at it from a parental point of view, you could be pulling your hair out as to what's going on with my child, because we see it, and usually it's the mum that sees it before the dad, but maybe the dad starts to see it when they start throwing the footballs or throwing the tennis balls, and it's like, I thought it'd be easier teaching my child to catch. I thought it'd be easier teaching them to kick a ball.
Yeah.
I thought it'd be easier getting their attention with sports and recreation activities and all of that. And it's like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Is it me being a bad sports person? Or I thought that the genes were going to come through me and my child was automatically going to be able to play sports and all the rest of it. So parents need to understand that actually you're not going to be able to teach your child to catch properly if there's a few of these big reflexes still active. The STNRs, the ATNRs, we'll get into each of them individually, but you're just not going to do it.
And Steve, a lot of coaches are unaware of this as well.
Yeah.
So coaches will have these children, and there will be some who they would class as talented, and the others have a real difficult time. And a lot of coaches can't understand why they just can't catch a ball. Why does their head go down the moment they raise their arms? And it's because they've not disconnected and they've not integrated these important reflexes. And the one for catching is what you've just spoken about, the STNR. The ATNR with riding a bike, the symmetric tonic neck reflex, and the ATNR, the asymmetric tonic neck reflex. But the STNR, you would see that in a child, if you were in a classroom even as well, is the moment that they go to write, their head goes really close to the paper. So that isn't just the way they write. It is just the way they write, but they also have an unintegrated STNR reflex in most cases. And the way you test for that is you just get them on all fours, you lift the head and you bring the head down, and you can see there's a collapse, there's a flexion in the elbows at the same time the head moves, or there's an extension of the legs when the head goes up. And that is what is going to, that needs to integrate, because the child's going to have a very difficult time at playing sport. And it's not that the child's incapable. It's just coaches are unaware, sports coaches are unaware, or teachers are unaware that this reflex hasn't integrated correctly.
And Seb, tell us with that STNR one in particular, then why isn't it integrating?
Well,
Crawling.
the STNR starts to come into play when the child goes on all fours,
Yeah.
and you'll see it rock forward and backward, and then it starts to turn its head, and the ATNR and the STNR start to integrate around the same time, and then it develops into this crawling pattern, this coordinated crawling pattern. But first it's one side, and they start to drag its leg, and then it goes into a coordinated opposites, and that's the blueprint of development.
And they're not switching off, because our children are not doing enough of it anymore.
And also because we're consumed by tech. Screens prevent us from using these muscles, and now they're saying, crawling is not that important anymore, because there's a large number of kids now going into the pediatric office and they haven't crawled, and parents are concerned. And this is why I say we've almost like demonized intuition of a parent. And what I mean by that is it's almost like, I'll tell you what's right for you, although the parent knows something's not right. But it's almost like we're being told what's right for us. Does that make sense? It's almost like demonizing, and the intuition of the mother knows there's something delayed, or there's something just not moving correctly. But
we've got to be careful of that.
Assures you
they'll catch up and all that. We've got to be careful of.
Everyone just develops at a different age. No.
They'll catch up.
There's a blueprint.
Yes, and yeah, absolutely. There's this blueprint. But the most important thing is we look at these reflexes as the foundational development to brain health. They don't always integrate the way we thought they did, because that's the mainstream medical model currently, where they believe primitive reflexes, they just disappear. But that's not true. There's kids now not performing these movements, so it's not integrating. Nutrition isn't the same like it used to be. There's a lot more processed foods now. There's a lot more chemically engineered foods that are now inhibiting access to developing the brain correctly. And I think that's really important, that we're looking at the variables and how modern environments have drastically changed. But for any parent listening, when you have an intuition, just make sure, it's usually right. A mother has an instinct. Parents have an instinct. You shouldn't compare, but I think at that stage, it's important to see chronologically how a child is developing.
It's almost taboo if a mother comes to you or a father comes to you and you're friends of that parent and they say, "Oh, my child's doing this," and you want to reassure them as a friend, and it's like, "Don't worry, none of us are neuroscientists, but it's almost programmed into us to say, 'Don't worry, they'll be fine.'" Because you don't want to point out you don't want to point out something in someone else's child. You don't want to say, "Oh, I noticed it as well."
Well, there's a reason for that.
Something's coming.
There's something happening there, and and all it is in its simplest form is immaturity in parts of the brain. Now, if we don't have those conversations and we just allow it to happen, that's not just going to get better. So that's
it's
really,
okay
really
to
important.
have an honest conversation, and you've not done anything wrong as a parent. There's nothing wrong of what you've done. It's just, let's accept the facts. Your child is not moving as they
you would like
be.
or should expect.
And shall we address it now, because it potentially could lead to something down the road? Or shall we just hide?
And actually, the first port of call with everything that we do within our business now is check for these reflexes. Whatever the symptoms or the challenges that the child or adults comes to us with, we have to go back and check these reflexes first. They're the brain's survival mechanism. So the brain, when these reflexes are still active, the brain's still doing its job. It's not done anything wrong yet. There's no brain damage. It's doing its job in making sure that child or adult is still surviving. So it's amazing. But what we've then got to do is add some stimulus.
And that's important, Steve, because most parents will probably listen to this and think, well, this blueprint, I've missed it. Well, look, it don't matter. It's finding out what they've missed, and then we put that information back in by assessing the reflexes, and then we can integrate them. So it don't matter what age, they've missed certain specific milestones, but just understand that they all play a critical role that a lot of parents are unaware of. And it's almost sort of subsided in a sense and made out to be like it doesn't really matter. And there are parents who, have a child who's miscrawling and they're doing absolutely fine, but then later on you tend to find that they have digestive issues or they have anxiety, or so there's always these developmental challenges then start to show up later. And we want to just make sure that, look, the brain's only responding in the way it's been designed to respond, which is to try and protect us from threat. Even if that's perceived threat, they might not be there. But if the brain's in this involuntary reflexive state and the Moro reflex is active, then the child can't regulate the fight and flight system. And that's why it's important we expose them to these sensory stimuluses that allows for this Moro reflex to then integrate. And we can test that through specific movements as well.
I think when we're talking about integrate, what we mean with that is switching off. So
yeah, or put to sleep, Steve.
Put to sleep. Yeah, put to sleep.
Because they can also reignite if there's trauma again, or if there's neglect or
off
abuse,
like a
or
switch,
if there's been an accident or an injury. They're designed to basically be put to sleep, because if at any point it's under threat again, they are there to protect us. So they can unintegrate again, but it's important we recognize that. But the child demonstrates it, the adult demonstrates it in behavior. Every brain has them.
And I think it's really important with these primitive reflexes and you can go and Google it, and there's out there in the research. If the palmar reflex, for example, the one in the hand, if that remains active, we're likely to see immaturity in handwriting. So it's not that it just doesn't switch off and it's still there. It will go on to cause some challenges. So like the Moro reflex that Seb just spoke about.
Should we talk about some of these reflexes specifically?
Yeah.
What the purpose of them is initially, why we have them, when they're supposed to disappear, what happens if they don't disappear. Because what we're saying is, as a collective, if they're present, they're going to cause issues. But actually in isolation, each of them lead to more specific conditions related to that reflex, correct? So Moro, for example, we'll talk about, but if that's still active, then anxiety is a big condition that may come in or challenge in early years or later years. So
I tell you what's a lovely one to start with is a spinal Galant reflex. Reflex. Let's talk about that. It's an amazing one. It's so the spinal Galant reflex, spine, down the back of the spine. It's a reflex that supports mummy during pregnancy, during the birthing process, and it's a wiggle. It's an involuntary wiggle. So as baby's traveling down the birth canal, the baby's back will hit the inside of mummy's womb and it will start to wiggle. So our mummies are amazing. So when they're in labor, they're pushing and and the contractions are happening, but the babies also help. Our babies also help with this involuntary wiggle. It's a spinal Galant reflex. Now, if, for example, this reflex doesn't switch off, and the way it switches off is hopefully through a natural birth process as possible, but then our babies need to go on the floor and on their backs. So as they're going on their backs, they'll make silly kind of snow angel movements to start with. And to start with, they're not great movement patterns, but as the more back time they have and exploration on the floor, those snow angel type movements will get better. The coordination get better. It will stimulate the back and tickle the back as we're doing it. And then that reflex will switch itself off because the brains now know I no longer need this wiggle. The brain's maturing itself. You're doing these movement patterns, so I'll switch off. However, and we see this a lot in our children now that have ants in their pants. They can't quite sit still. They have lack of focus and concentration sometimes. Well, if a child has a spinal Galant reflex still active, they have an involuntary wiggle. So if we have an involuntary wiggle, they are going to have ants in their pants. So certainly if at the back of their body goes against clothing, for example, or a chair, they might have a wiggle. So we see that a lot with children with ADHD, for example. They've got ants in their pants and they're wiggling, they're fidgety and things. Well, it might be a spinal Galant reflex still active. We put them on the back and do snow angel type movements and we gain coordination. It switches off that reflex. Well, then suddenly those behaviors start to lower. And it's, we're saying it like it's a real simple prayer. It takes time and we've got to stimulate a lot and you've got to do lots of repetition of this exercise. But the transformation for a child with a super active spinal Galant reflex to that child not having it active, the transformation of that child's huge. Huge. You'll go have a child that really can't regulate and sit still and concentrate to a child that suddenly can. And it's amazing.
It's as simple as that. It's stimulating the back for, 4 to 6 weeks, Seb, specifically for that one.
Yeah.
We'll integrate
Absolutely,
it. And you'll see some changes in behaviours within a couple of months.
One of the biggest ones is bedwetting beyond the ages of like 6. So if you to run your hands down the spine, that child when it's newborn will involuntarily urinate. Tend to see scoliosis quite common as well with these individuals. So they tend to have more postural dysfunctions in the spine because when you stroke down the back, if one side starts to react, this is when they're a little bit older or when they're younger, when it should really switch off in the very first early stages, the first few months. But if it doesn't, then we tend to see more muscle tone on one side, and then that almost drags the muscle tone almost drags the spine to one side as well, towards the most dominant side. So I think it's important that we're aware of these reflexes, because then we don't want to then try and address a problem that could have been
Mm,
prevented.
mm.
And I think it's important.
So it's not going to just resolve ants in the pants, restlessness, maybe urinating or bedwetting and things of
No,
that
it's not
nature.
something. It's not something you just grow out of, Steve.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, whereas a lot of people will think you just grow out of it. Well, if the brain remains in the same environmental conditions and nothing else changes, that will remain unintegrated because there's nothing integrating it. So I think it's important for parents to understand why
But
tummy time and back time
yeah.
is really important in the very early stages. And also, holding that child and attachment and the non-verbal cues and the kisses and everything, we're all trying to integrate these reflexes. The more we can expose that child to stimulus, the sound with the Moro reflex, temperature,
Yeah.
um, getting in the face, things like that, putting a teddy in the face. It's all things like that where we try and stimulate their senses as much as possible to try and also integrate the moral reflex.
Okay. So bedwetting, if parents have got a child that struggles with bedwetting,
Mm.
spinal galant is
Look at
essential
the
to
spinal
integrate.
galant reflex. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Moro, let's talk a little bit about Moro then. Where does that start? Because that starts way back when, doesn't it? With
yeah.
in the
Well,
development
it's there.
phase.
Yeah, it's there for before the moral. You have the fear paralysis reflex, and it's just there because in the first stages we have the sympathetic system that develops. So the reason why it does that is because the child is dependent on its caregiver. It doesn't have any independent skills just yet. So it can't orient itself. It needs support with all that. So it has to develop it in foundations. That's why it's important for us to stimulate it. But if the child remains with the moral reflex and it's not exposed to all these sensory modalities like sound and temperature and touch, then you tend to see the child in a more sympathetic state, which
Mm,
just basically means the child's constantly in fear, which then causes the anxiety symptoms. It almost paralyzes them. It makes them withdrawn, more withdrawn. They don't really want to approach certain things. So I think it's important we integrate that because we're
And the
seeing
purpose
a
of the
lot of.
Moro, the startle reflex, like what was the purpose of that in?
Well, it's for stimulation. So it's basically sound, temperature, touch. It tries to adapt to its surroundings better to
Mm,
know what's safe and what's unsafe. And that's how we build it into the child, is this
mm,
balance of fight and flight response, because it
yeah.
regulates the fight and flight and the fear paralysis, the protective state. So before any of us can create anything, Steve, or before we can grow and heal, we have to remove ourselves out of sympathetic state. But if we're in this involuntary moral reflex state,
Mm,
then we can't really develop the brain or access higher functions because it's in a state of stress. So just take yourself, for instance. If you're at any point in states of fear, it's very
yeah.
difficult to then try and digest your food or even breathe in a calming way. Shallow breathing takes over, the heart rate increases. So fear is quite physical as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And that's why they reside autonomically in the nervous system.
So if you clap your hands, if you make a loud noise around a baby,
You'll see the child flail its hands.
so the
Yeah.
Moro's also called the startle reflex. So they'll
Yeah.
do an involuntary action, and
Yeah. If you have
they
a balloon and you bring it up to the face, you blow up a balloon and
yeah,
it's coming towards the face, they almost startle as well. Any sudden temperature, like cold, for instance, and they
yeah.
reflexively move. So loud noises.
And why
like
would that?
you
So
said,
if they hear something they're scared of, they grab on,
Well,
and that's an
what happened to start
involuntary.
will happen, and then
Yeah.
immediately it'll come back in, and then it probably then links into the palmar reflex as well. So it then holds on to mummy.
Yeah.
and
So
the
it's a
spinal Galant reflex, because
Yeah.
it's constant movement.
Yeah.
So everything
it's all linked together.
integrates.
So a baby's afraid of everything.
Yeah.
And
It
then
doesn't
course
know
they
what's
are,
got.
yeah,
it's got
because
to
they're
learn
dependent.
to be
Yeah.
less afraid of
Yes.
things.
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
like its predisposition, its default state is
Yeah.
be scared of that.
So this
Grab
is
onto mum. Be scared of that. Grab onto mum.
That's important. I understand what I need to be scared of,
yes,
and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
understand what I don't
So hence the
want me
temperature
to be
thing.
scared of.
So if we then go hot, hot, hot as a baby goes towards a fire, that baby then has to feel that heat to go, oh, actually now, yes, they're right. There was a reaction to that, and that is hot.
That's the one, I think, the one reflex that a lot of parents can really understand, and the penny drops. It makes sense that if the Moro reflex is still active, and that reflex is to protect us and to give us a startle response of like fear, be careful, go into a ball, grab mother.
Yeah.
If that's now active at 6, 7, 8 years old,
You'll have a reflexive response
if you're
to fear.
overly sensitive
Yeah.
to like a fear stimulus or a noise or something, and that's what we're seeing. So parents with children that are really affected and react strongly to loud noises or traffic noises, or struggle with noises in the dinner hall or something like that. Would that be specifically related back to a Moro
Absolutely,
reflex?
yeah, exactly right.
That's still active.
Exactly. Right.
And what
But
we don't want to do on that is prevent that child from ever hearing noises, because what we now need to do is introduce.
Yeah. So when I'm taking my
stimulus.
child in the park at 5 years old, and other children, parents' children are up on the high slide and they're going down it, and I'm trying to coax my child up.
Yeah.
If they've still got an active Moro reflex,
They might not do it.
There's no way in hell they're going up to that big slide.
No.
But
or
that's
they're going
a good
down the
signal.
zip.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a good signal. So you would start off them, you'd start them off by jumping off the settee or jumping onto the settee. Obviously, parents are going to go, don't jump on my settee type thing. But you would create like a little step box, or where they jump on and off on, and you slowly start to developing from their level of development. So you wouldn't expect them to then go up, because that's not going to happen.
No.
The Moro reflexes hasn't integrated fully, and also you're going to put them into more stress. And
But
then
it's never going to happen,
associate...
is it? They're never going to break out of their comfort zone. They're never going to break out of their comfort zone.
Involuntary,
It's like, if you're ever under threat, you're not going to then face the threat if you know there was a consequence or a huge danger to that outcome. So you wouldn't, even if there wouldn't be, but if you've perceived to be it is as well, you're never going to put yourself forward for that. So we have to be very mindful. So we developing from a lower stage, lower level.
But this is where it comes from, a step by step, that we talk about this all the time. You can't overlove your children. Of course, they need as much love as you can get, but they need to be playing more. They need to be exploring the floor a little bit more from a really young age. Can they crawl around? Obviously, you've got to make it safe. You don't want them to hurt themselves, but they need to. Well, we used to run and jump off sofas, run and jump and wrestle and play tag and all these kind of things that we're now kind of stopping. Even at our schools now, they're taking away monkey bars. They're taking away play equipment because a child might fall off and hurt themselves. Well, yes, they might stop that child hurting themselves from a bumping themselves, but what they're also stopping is neurological development. So the child bumping and hurting themselves is a way less of a consequence than a child not actually developing neurologically, because our children have to go through these movement patterns. They have to play, they have to wrestle, they have to jump, they have to fall off
parents,
things.
and also remember, they're in the formation of growth, so they're still very immature, so they don't really understand language. But if a child's in the bath and they're putting their head underwater, in the moment, the parent or the caregiver says, be careful, instantly that puts the child in this state of fear and fight and flight response. So the Moro reflex will associate a reflexive reaction to it. So it's there for a reason. So we've also got to be very careful in how we craft our words, because be careful means danger, although there is no danger. So in that sense, that's what we're seeing now.
But
more
that sort
so.
of parenting, and we're sort of overlapping now with parenting and how we raise our children, the language we use. Like, if you say be careful to a child with a really active Moro reflex, they're going to react a lot more, in a different way than a child without the active Moro reflex. So it's like the parenting language is important, but actually, if you don't address this root cause, this Moro reflex, then your parenting techniques aren't going to work.
No.
Being more relaxed and allowing your child to experience danger isn't going to make them
fall.
Isn't going to make them. Yeah, but isn't going to make them less anxious if the Moro reflex.
If the Moro reflex is active, it's active.
See what I'm saying? So you can be this most relaxed parent in the world, or change your parenting technique, but actually, you have to address this reflex first, and then the parenting techniques will
absolutely
help.
But one of the way in stimulating it as well is for that. Otherwise, we then inhibit it, don't we? The moment we use be careful, or I'm scared for you to do that and follow through on it.
I guess we can make it worse, is what you're saying. You can make it worse.
Yeah. It's okay, do it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if they're in reflexive states anyway, but what I'm saying is predominantly, we're the ones that are creating them, in a sense. We're putting the skills in them. We're saying you can do that, but you can't do that. So we are also transferring behaviors into that child. So there is ways where the cognitive sense, when they're mature enough, does then respond in a fear paralysis way. So I think it's important as well, in terms of parents, understand that we want to challenge them, but we don't want to overwhelm them when we challenge them.
Absolutely.
We don't want to overprotect them.
But I don't think you can get your children to participate, from my own experience, in sport when some of these reflexes are still active.
It's a lot harder.
Like it's impossible to say, go on, be free, join the group.
Yeah.
No, daddy's here, mummy's there. Like, it's tough.
Unless
they won't do it.
Unless they were familiar with kids.
Yeah, if it's a cousin or a brother or something
a cousin,
like that,
someone they were familiar, they could probably play the 1-to-1 or something like that. But it's very.
But I think these reflexes, going back to these reflexes, we've got to be really important that these are involuntary. They happen.
Yeah, they're reflexive.
They just happen. You cannot stop. So if they're active, they just happen. What our role as parents and us as practitioners and us at BrainX, our role really is to try and take that child from involuntary to voluntary control. Once a child is in voluntary state, they can then learn. They can then be, and then it's our parenting, then it's our environment.
That's when I feel like what you're saying is that's when parenting really starts. That's when you can really influence your child.
More so than when it's an involuntary state. I think when they're in an involuntary state, we still got to be, you can do it. You've got this, super positive. You can jump in the pool. But if you went and said, right, Jeb, be really, really careful. That's deep. I wouldn't jump in there. Well, even if they're in involuntary state, that's making it worse. So, so we've got to take that child out, and these reflexes should switch off naturally. But in the world we're in there, they're not. So we've now got to become mindful of it, that our children have to move. The only way these reflexes switch off is by movement.
And if there's a piece of advice that you could sort of give every parent listening to this, is that if you see a child that is really confident and they're willing to take part in sports, and that they go to the party willingly, and they get involved in social situations, and your child can access those skills as well. Your child can be confident.
Oh, you can get there. Yeah, absolutely.
If your child is not confident and is shy and is timid and is highly anxious,
but don't judge them too early, Steve.
That's now. Yeah, that's now at 4.
They can become that outgoing child that,
so that nervous child.
That's what we're all worried about, right? Is will my child make friends? Are they going to be socially okay?
And yes, we can change.
Are they going to need me forever?
Yeah.
Like, how do I make them independent?
Yeah,
we spend all our time. Yeah, we spend all our time trying to make them independent. But what I'm hearing from my brother, whose kids are growing up, is you'll miss it. You'll miss that, reliance on mummy and the reliance on daddy as well. But what I think, especially daddies, we just want them to go out and be confident and happy.
Yeah.
And
but confident is a muscle. Confident is a muscle, Steve. It's myelination, so it takes time. So some children will develop confidence a little bit quicker than others, which is.
But I think if the reflex is still there, they can't access confidence.
They can't access it, absolutely. But what I'm saying, Steve, is confidence is one of them things as well. It's
It's got to be learned.
Don't judge it based on where they currently are now.
Yeah.
Understand that it has a way of maturing and
I
developing.
think this conversation we have around primitive reflexes will become more and more apparent in the coming years. People will need to know about this because it's a big thing. We're in schools and so many children now are still in a reflexive, involuntary state. And we're trying to, you and I had a conversation the other day talking about, we got 4 and 5-year-olds, they're trying to have phonics lessons and learning how maths and reading and writing. And then you've got children that cannot put their right hand on their left shoulder yet, or their left hand. They cannot do that movement yet.
They struggle with instruction.
They struggle with instruction, so they can't. And that's because they haven't done these movement patterns and they're still in an involuntary state. So we're trying to teach our children because they're chronologically 5. They're not ready to be taught yet because movement is first for everything. Everything comes from movement first because we've got to knock out these reflexes through movement. We've got to look and through play and exploration and learning our children need to learn how to control their bodies.
And parents don't need to worry about my child being left behind with phonics or, my child needs to count to this number
at
before
3.
they go to school or reception, or they need to understand all these letters, or they need to read at this level. Don't worry about the academic stuff. And this is one of the biggest messages you shared with me, Seb, is the academic stuff will come if they're physically,
if the movement patterns are good,
if their brain is developed at the right stage foundationally.
Absolutely. If social, emotional behaviours
will come.
Yeah. If your social engagement is good, communication is good, and I can read emotion on a child, Steve, because I can read my own emotion, that's much more valuable in an academic setting, and especially for developing social friendships. And that is crucial. That's way before reading and writing. But reading and writing becomes easier if the child can regulate emotion.
But specifically, you told us about your youngest going to school and that you didn't spend time reading and writing or showing him letters or phonics or anything before he went to reception at 4 years old.
But he was amazing at moving.
Well, not only that, he had his parents' evening 2 days ago, Steve. And the teacher, you'd be astounded. And I was like, yes, my experiment's working. So what happened, I'll tell you. So the teacher turned around and said to Jen, and Jen told me this, she says, basically, when we have children, they're either really good at maths, really good at English, and really good at sport. He's good at everything. And he's one of the youngest in his year group. It works.
Yeah.
Which was astonishing, and I thought brilliant. But Adam's the same, incredible athlete, incredible top sets in academics. So but I only attained this information after Sarah and Erin. So I've gone through all that with them, and Erin's now at university, doing a degree and stuff. But what I'm saying is, this was someone who was ruled out. So it don't matter. And Erin wasn't confident. She would have got diagnosed with selective mutism. She got diagnosed with dyslexia. But we've had a way where we've developed these now where, she was in involuntary states. So it was important that we understand that the brain has neuroplasticity, and that's what we've always got to remember. It has this amazing ability, and we shouldn't judge children too early like we're doing now.
It's an important sentiment. We don't want to judge children too early. However, they need to hit certain developmental milestones at certain times as well. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword there. It's like, that a child can access those if we go back and put the right information. But it is important to judge your child on developmental milestones as well and expect them to crawl.
Yeah, the symptoms, but not perceive it as that is the way they're going to be for the rest of their lives, and they're not going to be able to develop.
But they should be crawling at a certain age, and we don't want to forget about that.
Absolutely, Steve. But we shouldn't be limiting them to that's the way you're going to be for the rest of your life based on an assessment at 2 years old. That's what I don't agree with. So I'm all in agreement of seeing symptoms, because that's what we look for. The symptoms are crucial, because whatever the body demonstrates, that is how the brain's connected. So the body tells us a lot about what's going on in the brain. The brain and body isn't disconnected. So I'm all for symptoms, brilliant, but don't limit the child to assume that's the way you're going to be for the rest of your life, and you're unable to develop these skill sets that you're currently immature in. That's what I don't agree with, because that is inconsistent with the modern science in neuroplasticity.
Amazing chat as always. We've covered quite a few primitive reflexes. I think next time we'll cover a few more.
Yeah.
And then we'll get into some more environmental factors we haven't even touched on. but they all can be rectified and we can intervene.
Absolutely.
We can make
Our
it
brain
better.
is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's the
We
most.
have epigenetics. Epigenetics and neuroplasticity is the way forward. It complements everything.
Amazing. Take
Awesome.
care, guys. We'll speak again next week.
Brilliant.